Hey everybody, I'm Regina Bryant and welcome to the Women of Empowered Living. My guest today is Kim McKenna. She is a nurse practitioner and one of my new friends, and I'm excited and honored to have her. She's going to share her insights and experiences as a healthcare provider and business owner during the pandemic. Now, before we get into all of that, I want to share some of Kim's credentials because I think it's really important as we set the stage for today's conversation. So I have my notes here because this is quite the impressive list. Kim is the CEO of One Cross Medical Clinic in Campbellsville, Kentucky. She earned her bachelor's in nursing in 1992 and her master of science in nursing in 2002. She currently serves on the Campbellsville University School of Nursing Advisory Board. She's a member of Christian Community Health and the Christian Medical and Dental Association. Her life's purpose is to bring health and healing to the people she serves. Kim has a passion for the underserved and a strong desire to transform care for the marginalized population. With that passion, Kim opened One Cross Medical in January of 2015, and it has grown into one of the largest clinics in Campbellsville and the only clinic with an integrative health model in the area. So I can't wait to hear more about that. Kim's team has worked extraordinarily hard to earn a 5-star rating from hundreds of reviews from their patients. As if all that isn't enough, Kim is one of us. She's a member of the Empowered Living community. She's an executive director with the John Maxwell team. And this is fabulous. She and her husband, Larry, live on a 140-acre farm in Adair County, Kentucky. And I can't wait to visit because I'm sure it's beautiful. It is my pleasure to welcome Kim McKenna to the show. Hey, Kim, how are you?
Regina, how are you doing?
I'm awesome. So tell us, where are you today?
Oh, I'm in my little office. We are getting ready to move into a larger facility, so we're really thrilled with that. But until then, we have rented a small office space a little bit right across the street from our clinic. So that's where I'm at. Waiting to move to our new location.
I'm just so glad that you were able to take the time to have this conversation today. I'm really honored, Kim. Now, before we get into all things pandemic and healthcare, tell us about your family and life on this farm. That really intrigued me, and I'm coming for a visit, I promise you.
That would be great. Oh, well, I'm married. I have 5 children. I have 7 grandchildren. We have a beautiful farm that's way out. You can't see another house from her. So we're over a mile off of the road, and we have trees surrounding us. And that's kind of my peace and my sanctuary. So go home, horses and chickens and dogs. And we have some cattle and things like that to just kind of help keep us peaceful, and a garden. And so we're working on organic farming, just kind of a hobby farm kind of thing. So it's good.
Oh, right, because as if you're not a busy medical practice owner or nurse practitioner, why not work on organic farming also?
Yeah, so that kind of helps balance the stress a little bit, because digging in the dirt just does something for the soul.
Oh, that's awesome. So before we get into the pandemic, tell us about One Cross Medical and your practice there in Kentucky. And what is the integrative healthcare model? I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, so when we started in 2015, God gave us a mission, and that mission was One Cross Clinic will offer high quality healthcare of body, mind, and spirit to all we serve, because Jesus is the healer. And so that's where we started at. And so that body, mind, and spirit was a holistic model. Now, I started with me, a front office person, a nurse, and my 17-year-old daughter. And so we were really small. And so that was a huge mission for such a small practice, but that's what God gave us. And so it's expanded. We wanted to take care of that whole person, and we thought that was a really missing piece. So we have a mental health department now. We have a department that takes care of addiction and recovery. And then there's also the medical model model, but we have that collaboration so that we can take care of folks, because if their mind is sick, their body's going to be sick. And so we get to work together with counselors and psych nurse practitioners and medical, and really take care of that whole person instead of things being pieced apart. So we're really blessed to have that model, and it's really changing lives.
That's incredible. And approximately how many patients do you all serve each year?
I just counted from what we've seen so far this year. We've seen over 20,000 patients this year. So we have a really busy practice.
Oh my gosh, you sure do. Congratulations, because I know this is more than just work for you, that it is passion and a mission. And I know how much that means to your faith and just to you personally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's go back to the conversation that I'm really excited to have with you, and that is going back to March 2020, when this coronavirus pandemic sort of invaded all of our lives. And you and your team as healthcare practitioners, you're on the front line of this. Tell me what those early days and weeks were like for all of you.
Oh, I think in the beginning, we thought it was just going to be like, flu gets around here. Some seasons are really rough, and sometimes we close the schools for a week, and, because flu is so bad. And so we thought, oh, we're going to be, the community's going to close down for a week or two, and that's going to be it. And then we'll go back and we'll return to normal. So it wasn't like that. That kept going on and on and on. And so we had to really immediately start thinking about how to change our model and how to change things, because people weren't getting care. They weren't coming in for the regular appointments. They weren't being served. And so really, how do we get people seen, and how do we get people care? So that was a challenge. So we quickly developed a telehealth model that we hadn't had before, and implemented that quickly, began calling patients, getting them into that telehealth model, and then started, seeing some of that, the COVID patients, coming in, and some of the fear that came along.
Now, how about you and your staff, Kim? What was your level of fear like, and what were you thinking as this thing started really ramping up? I mean, where were you guys at emotionally and mentally as a practice?
Well, it was mixed, because we didn't know what was going to happen or what was. And I think the first thing that happened is we started getting a lot of people calling angry. When people are afraid, they're angry. And so we did a lot of just talking to the staff about how to handle some of these angry patients, and really to be supportive to the staff, because, they had anger coming at them. Of course, they are also the front line. So when people came in, we really at first didn't know what to expect. How bad was this illness going to be? How are we going to treat people? And so, we started really digging in and looking at research, going by what we had, prepared for and seen before with other respiratory illnesses. And remember, about 2 years prior to this, we had SARS.
Yeah.
That was another coronavirus. And so there was a big alarm at that time as well. And how do we deal with that in those patients? And the mortality rate was actually higher with SARS than it was with the COVID. So
That's interesting. And before we get into that, you talked about patients calling angry. I had not thought about that. And many moons ago in another life, I managed a couple of healthcare offices. And so I remember being with my team, taking phone calls from patients, never during a pandemic, of course, but I didn't even consider what the patients might be going through and how that might show up on the phone. So what was that like? And what were those angry calls? Were they angry just because they didn't know, because of what were you guys hearing?
They had issues and medical problems, and they were afraid to come into the clinic. to be seen. They were afraid to stay home, and they didn't know what to do. So, they were just really angry and afraid. So, some people you still need to see, and you can't do everything over the phone. So assuring people that they were going to be safe coming to the clinic, and
Wow.
developing new processes and procedures to make sure that they were safe coming into the clinic. So, that was a big challenge, just reassuring folks that they were safe. And also, sometimes to treat people appropriately, you got to come in. And so you can handle some things televisit, but, and we did that, especially for our really fragile elderly folks. But even training the medical staff on how do you take care of that patient that you normally saw, and how do you look for the signs and symptoms and are able to try to care for them appropriately with telehealth, that was a challenge as well.
The challenges seem to be many. As you started in March and April and May of 2020, I mean, there was no stopping the challenges in healthcare. So let's talk about that fear piece, and how did you and your staff decide how you were going to handle those phone calls? That could not have been easy for all of you, because you're going through the pandemic just like all of us.
Yeah, and also we started hearing things like clinics were closing. So many clinics during that period of time closed. Initially they thought that, just like we did, it was just going to be a week or 2 weeks. And we never closed, but there were a lot of clinics who did close. And so when you close, making that decision to reopen is more and more difficult. So there were a lot of clinics that were closed. So people who were normally seeing their regular provider somewhere else now had nowhere to go. And the emergency rooms were filling up. And so we handled those calls that as best we could. So we took care of our own patients first, and then we would, additionally then take care of some other folks. At one point, we were asked by EMS, the emergency medical system, hey, can you take some of these people that are trying to go to the emergency room? They really don't need to go to the emergency room. They have a cold, or they have bronchitis, or they have something that doesn't warrant an ER visit, but because the ERs are full and we have nowhere to take them. So we did start taking some of those as well as we could. So there was a lot of chaos and really an emergency, system that we had to decide, who we were going to take care of first and how many extras we could take in.
And just even going back to the decision that you made to stay open, when other clinics were closing, was that ever an option for you all? And what led you to say, no, we're not going to close, unless you absolutely had to? I mean, you saw other clinics right in your area saying close, close, and you all chose to stay open. How did you make that decision? What did you base that on?
We're the only ones here for them. So, in our community, we're the only clinic that takes care of Medicaid and Medicare patients. So, we're the only thing they have, and we've been the only thing that they've had for years. And so us closing, it was unacceptable. We still needed to take care of those patients, because then they would have to go out of county, or they would be loading the emergency room up. So that was not an option for us. We had to stay open and take care of folks.
And it's one thing, Kim, for you to be able to control your own fears and your own mindset and lean on your faith. What is it like to lead a team the size of your office as they battle their fears and their challenges? I just speak to us a little bit about what that was like.
That's a good point. That's tough. That's tough. We advised our patients, many of our patients, as well as staff, stop watching the news, because you have two mechanisms in your body to protect you. You have your fight or flight response, and then you have your immune response. So there's only so much energy in your body. So I had to really educate my staff as well as patients. Look, We need to keep our fight or flight response. Your body doesn't know that if you're afraid of a virus or if a tiger is running after you, it doesn't know that. It knows that you're afraid. So teaching people how to breathe and how to calm that fear response down and really kind of mentally say, hey, I've got to slow this down. And sometimes even if we did exercises of meditation in the morning just to kind of help calm that fear response down. Because if you're afraid, then your immune system all of the blood supply goes to your arms and legs to get ready to run. And so it's ready to run from a tiger, and it doesn't have any energy to protect you from all the, your regular viruses that you encounter every day. So that just leaves you more weak and vulnerable. So talking to my staff about that and educating them to help to calm those fears down.
How hard must that have been at first to say, don't watch the news? Because I sort of stopped daily news watching several years ago. Mm-hmm. And then I remember when the Boston marathon bombing happened, I was kind of back in for days at a time. Yeah. And then the pandemic happened, I'm back in for weeks at a time. Mm-hmm. And knowing the damage it's doing. So as a healthcare provider, to hear you say that, that's really huge to us as a reminder for us not to take in that fear. Mm-hmm. So that's really that was one of the first key points that allowed you and your team just to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, and that was as far as our faith goes, 1 Peter 5:8 talks about to be sober, be aware. Your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking who he may devour. He's a roaring lion. So a lion doesn't go after its prey roaring. He goes after its prey quiet and pounces, right? So if he's roaring, he's trying to make you afraid. And so reminding my staff that, look, he's trying to make us all afraid, and we don't need to. He can devour you if you're coward in fear. But if you refuse to be afraid, and I don't know how many times in the Bible God says, do not fear, and to just trust the Lord through this. And that's what we just kept we started every morning with prayer and devotion, which is something we always did anyway. But just doing that reminder and reminding who we served and who we are, and really talking about, that our adversary is just trying to make us afraid. And if we're afraid, then we're not able to really function appropriately and help the patients that really need our help, and also help ourselves. So we talked about that often, and really just encouraged each other in the faith and prayed for each other each morning as we went on our day. That is what got us through.
Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful that here you are at the beginnings of a pandemic like the rest of us, and you and your team chose faith over fear, and you chose meditation to limit the news and just to keep going, keep serving. That really brings tears to my eyes, because it's so easy to do the opposite. And I think about healthcare people not even knowing themselves, thinking about your own families, and still being there to serve other people. Gosh, Kim, so, okay, once your practice is going, you guys are determined to keep going. As a medical person, first of all, were you treating COVID patients? What was your stance on that?
Yeah. So, we started seeing these patients come in, and of course, we went to a lot of the sources that were coming around. We were looking on the CDC website and looking at their suggestions, some new emerging infectious organism. That's typically where we go to look. And, a lot of the stuff they were saying just didn't make sense. They were saying not to treat, don't give any kind of medication or anything like that. And when you're treating a respiratory illness, we all know if it was named something else besides COVID, we know some different treatment modalities that we would normally use. And so they were saying not to do that. So I started just really looking at other sources. Who are the people that are seeing more cases than us? Who are the people, there was different hot spots that were, seeing a whole lot more than we were, a whole lot more patients before us. And I was just thankful for a lot of the research that other people were doing that were really trying trying to share that information. So Dr. Peter Nicola was one of those who really shared, I think, the first algorithm that really helped a lot. And I remember the first day that I chose to use that algorithm, and I had a patient that was I think we have a view of what Kentucky people are, kind of redneck, bullheaded people. And that is a lot of our folks. This guy actually was from Chicago, moved here, but he was very strong-willed. But a lot of people here smoke. Tobacco was our, product for many, many years that we grew here. And so he had really bad lungs. So when he got sick with anything, he usually went down. So I was using all of the medications that I knew to try to get him better, and he wasn't getting better at all. And I took a chance. I looked at this algorithm I'd been looking at, and I gave him hydroxychloroquine. And, he didn't want to go to the hospital. I wanted to send him to the hospital, and he just refused to go. So I gave him 24 hours. I said, I'm going to try this medicine. You're going to come back tomorrow, but if you're not better, you have to, because you are really not doing well. Within 24 hours, it was like a 360-degree difference. And I was just shocked. I'm like, okay, because I had not prescribed it for much else but lupus. And sometimes we give it if somebody's going to a foreign country that has malaria, we'll give it, while they're there and home. I had not used it in that capacity, but it was like a miracle drug for this man. And so I was convinced at that point that this was a good treatment. And so we started using that on our patients until they started restricting it. It was the first drug ever that they were talking about restricting for off-label use. And so, we use a lot of medications off-label. So off-label means that it's not been FDA approved for that purpose. Right. And many medications, when the FDA approves something, it's very expensive for them to get approval for the different things. So one might be, for example, a blood thinner. One of the new blood thinners that came out, it was for people with atrial fibrillation, which is a condition in the heart. But it was only for one specific type, because that was what the research was done on initially. Now, we knew that it would work really well with other types, but if we used it for other types, it would be off-label. So that's
I want to go back to something that you said a moment ago. You said that, okay, at the beginning of this, you were seeing some things that didn't quite make sense from your career as a nurse practitioner. You've been in healthcare for many years, using drugs off-label and having certain protocols for different type of respiratory illnesses. And all of a sudden, something called COVID, coronavirus, comes along, and you all as medical people were told not to use things that you had always been using. That's what your experience is.
Yeah. For example, budesonide is an inhaled steroid that we frequently, if you go to the hospital with an asthma attack, or this man that has the lung condition, sometimes he would get flare-ups of this lung condition without there being an infectious process even, or if he did have an infection, then, we would give him an inhaled steroid to help decrease the inflammation in his lungs and open up his lungs and help him to breathe. And so they were told not to use that. Also, we use oral steroids often to help decrease that inflammation in the lungs and body and help people to breathe,
Right.
better. And so we were told not to use an oral steroid, not to use an inhaled steroids. And so that's almost completely standard of care for anybody that comes into your office or the emergency room, to give that if they're having respiratory distress. So some of those things, this just didn't make sense to me. That's what
How do you feel about this? You've been in medicine a long time, and now all of a sudden this pandemic comes, and you're told not to use certain things that you had been, so not just even as a protocol, but right. What were you internally thinking about this? Like, wow, I'm being told now not to use what I've always used under these circumstances?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so initially you're like, well, okay, there must be some adverse reaction to it.
Right?
But it still didn't make sense to me. But, I got to where I needed to use it for this man. I did use that. And so those are some of the things that helped people. And I use that on a lot of patients. Budesonide is amazing. And so we kept a lot of people out of the hospital because I gave them inhaled budesonide. Now, insurances around this time stopped covering that medicine, which is just mind boggling to me. Well, I got it filled 3 months before and it was not a problem. Why are they all of a sudden not covering it? It was just very odd. So there's many families I told you're going to have to buy this, but it's really going to make a huge difference in you or your family member.
That
So
is, that's incredible for me to think about as a medical practitioner, to have had a history of using certain medications and then all of a sudden that's taken away from you. You said you had to go and start doing your own homework and
mhm.
doing your own research.
Yeah, yeah.
And what was that like for you? Because I'm thinking not only are you dealing with COVID like the rest of us, but now as a medical person, you've got to start doing your own research. What was that like in the beginning? Because you actually had trusted sources that were now telling you different things not to do.
Yeah, I was, we were hearing, even from our prayer group in the morning, all of our staff, this family member and that family member, people were dying from COVID left and right. And so we started talking to other providers that were saying, I haven't lost a patient yet. This treatment works. So we immediately started using that. I would rather use a treatment and it not work than me to sit here and not do anything at all. And what I started seeing was medical providers all of a sudden turning their patients away that came to them with these respiratory illnesses. These were really good medical providers that have excellent reputations. And all of a sudden, would go out to a car, do a COVID test on them. It was positive, never examine their patient at all and send them home and say, we don't treat COVID. And I just don't know how you can do that. If I was treating a flu on a high risk patient, I would bring them in, I would examine them and see what level of care I needed to give them, because different people have different responses. Some people will get a secondary bacterial pneumonia, which is very common in a viral illness because your immune system is fighting that virus and it can't fight the bacterial infection. So, with the flu, I'll give you an antiviral agent. If you're at high risk, I typically give you an antibiotic with that as well. And then if you're having respiratory problems, I treat that respiratory problems a lot of times with budesonide. So that's a virus. Why would I not do it with this? An antiviral agent. Ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are both antiviral agents.
Why, why did they become so controversial, Kim? You're telling me you did your research. You know the medications prior to COVID, and even researching once COVID started.
Yeah.
You, as a medical professional, you know the medications that could work.
Yes.
Why did the medications that could work? You mentioned hydroxy. You mentioned the other. Why did they become controversial? Because some of us sitting at home, like myself, we would hear bits and pieces on the news. Why did that become controversial?
I've never experienced anything like this ever. I've never seen
Even
medical
during
treatment.
SARS, right? Even during SARS, you never went through this.
No. Like I said, SARS had a higher mortality rate than COVID. And so I don't, I could not explain it. It seemed like medicine all of a sudden got political. There seemed to be a lot of, um, you know, back and forth. It was the first time that we couldn't, as medical professionals, talk about the positives and negatives about treatment out loud. And that if you came up with an alternative treatment, your thought processes were squashed, or you were
It's interesting that we talk about diversity a lot now, quite a bit in the last couple of years, and yet diversity of thought. If you wanted to bring a challenge, or here's what worked for me, you're telling us, and everybody watching, just remember, this is Kim's experience as a medical practitioner, as a business owner in Kentucky, and what she and her team are going through, as well as the other colleagues that she's spoken to, I'm sure, and connected with throughout this process. These drugs were becoming controversial. And this did not happen during SARS. This is the first time, SARS, and this is the first time in your career that you've seen this.
Yeah. Well, these drugs have been used on humans for a long time, long enough that they're cheap and generic. So it's not a new drug. It's not something that we just, if you get a new drug, we're taught to be skeptical of any new drug. Mm-hmm. To watch it, you might start it on a small population and kind of watch if they're high risk, and the risk benefit of not knowing a whole lot about the drug is more beneficial. We're taught to really scrutinize everything new. I mean, not everything the FDA approves stays approved. I mean, there's been many drugs that were approved and then taken off the market a couple of years later, because after that couple of years of use, we saw all kinds of problems. So we take it, even any new drug that comes in the market, we're careful with it. The drug companies come out and say all these wonderful things about this great, wonderful drug, but, we're taught to be skeptical and careful about those things. Now, these drugs we've used for many, many years. In a lot of countries, they're sold over the counter. It's not hard to get. Here we do have it by prescription, but they're very common drugs.
It's really quite amazing to hear you say all of this. I'm kind of blown away. And again, for everybody in our community and for anyone watching, Kim isn't pushing any particular belief or version. Kim, like all of our guests, just is sharing what she went through, her experience, and what she was up against. How many COVID patients would you say, Kim, if you had to give us an approximate number, that you've treated in your practice?
In my practice, probably about 1,500, wow. Maybe a little bit more. Myself, I've treated over 1,000.
So you yourself have treated over 1,000 and about 1,500 from your entire practice.
Now, Regina, we had a lot of controversy with my nurse practitioners. I lost 3 nurse practitioners through this, and it was because of a difference in thought. And I had them say, I'm not going to treat these patients. And that's
so they were saying to you, Kim, they were not going to treat COVID patients.
Mm-hmm. And my mind was boggled. I heard things like, you can't make me go against the CDC. And, at the same time, I would have a provider say, oh, I had a nurse come in and I need to put her on an antidepressant because she lost 5 COVID patients today.
Wow.
And, we had those stories, but at the same time, my medical providers were refusing to treat these patients. And, I just couldn't understand that mentality. Why would you not give somebody a chance and treat them? Why would you leave them?
And you said something interesting a moment ago. They didn't want to go against the CDC because the drugs became controversial in the medical community and maybe to the public at large from snippets of reports that we non-medical people would hear. The drugs became controversial because was it the CDC where you were told or explicitly read in the guidelines not to use certain drugs for COVID when they had worked prior? If we weren't calling it COVID, then it was fine.
Mm-hmm. It was the first time that I don't think people really look at the CDC hugely that much. We do for general things, but I mean, I look up when somebody's going to another country to see what kind of vaccines they need to get before they go, or if I need to treat them for malaria or not, I'll look there. We have our general algorithms and guidelines, but they're guidelines we've used forever. So on other things. So, I couldn't impress upon them that, this is a standard of care that we know to do. If it was not COVID, take that word away, and this patient with these symptoms came in to see you, how would you treat them? And I think that there was just a fear of going against the grain. But I
Did you
had
guys have backlash? I mean, was there backlash against you guys, doctors, nurse practitioner, nurses in general, if you went against the new normal, which was throwing away what had been working? Was there backlash that you could have felt, or?
a little bit, yeah. So several of the large chain pharmacies refused to fill those prescriptions. I had Walmart call me, I'm not going to fill ivermectin for you any longer because you're writing too much of it. So we really had to go to some of the local hometown pharmacies. And so, those are the only ones currently that'll fill them. There are big chains like Kroger and Walmart and CVS won't fill those in our community. So it's, we have 3 local pharmacies that were, now one of them stopped, but we've got 2 pharmacies here, and I know there's some communities that have no pharmacies, but now initially those costs were really low. So even if people couldn't afford to get them, it was cheap. But the prices have gone skyrocketed, and insurances have stopped paying for those medicines. So it's even difficult for people to afford them now.
And that's what you use, because if your practice saw 1,500 COVID patients, first of all, did you lose anybody to COVID?
I lost 2 patients to COVID. Yeah. A cardiac patient and a cancer patient. Yeah.
Okay, a cardiac patient and a cancer patient.
Yeah, yeah. So we've just had 2 deaths. So, our statistics are pretty good. And
you're using what was deemed and still is, I guess, the controversial medications, but you had been using those for COVID type respiratory illnesses prior to COVID. So it wasn't controversial to you because it was guidelines, it was standard practice of care.
Now we talked a lot about prevention too. So, vitamin therapy, do things to boost your immune system, eat right, exercise, take, zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C.
I started taking both zinc and vitamin D at the beginning of
yes, which is wonderful. So, those things, because the virus doesn't like zinc. So if you've got it in your system, then it's not going to replicate as fast. And so that's particularly with this one, as well as others as well. So you're just boosting that immune system, which makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense.
Why would we not, instead of talking fear, hey, let's talk to people about what they can do to boost their immune system so that if they did get it, they won't get as severe of a case. That's what we should be teaching people.
That's exactly what we should be teaching people. And you just gave us a huge lesson in that.
Yeah.
As a nurse practitioner, you're sharing with the audience, hey, everybody, exercise, eat right, vitamin D, zinc. Let's talk preventative.
Make sure you're sleeping. Make sure you're, a
Turn
lot
off
of
the news.
Yes. Regina, I had patients. I had one of my patients that got COVID that did not have to go to the hospital, was on a lung transplant list. I have people that were on oxygen therapy, daily, that's 24/7 for them that got COVID, that did very well, that we kept them home. They did not have to be hospitalized. So we kept people out of the hospital. We kept them from getting severe because we stayed on them about, here, let's do this for prevention. You're extremely high risk. So I'm going to give you this medicine so that you are, we can prevent this. If you do get it, we can keep that at a very low illness for you. So, it worked.
That's incredible. So where are you in your practice today at nearly 2 years in? What's your thought process as you're treating your patients? Anything different or just kind of communicate with us the difference between then and how it's evolved to now. Are you still having some of the same challenges with the fear? Is that ramping up again? What's kind of happening as you're seeing it from your perspective from then to now?
Mhm. I think the fear is less, especially for our patients. Now, I think for a lot of people, Regina, people got wind that we were treating people, and we had people call us from all over the country, which broke my heart because we can't treat everybody. But I
Are
mean,
you kidding me? So people knew that your clinic, that you were taking and treating COVID patients, and when they couldn't get help in their own community, they were reaching out and wanting to come and see you guys?
they were. Yeah.
Wow.
People from other states were calling all around. And so, with desperate, I have, 3 family members that are in the hospital, and there's 2 of us here that are sick. And I was told you would help us. And, there was just some desperate pleas to people. So, I would ask them, well, what about your medical provider? And nobody will treat us here. Nobody, um,
And
so.
Kim, and just to get your opinion,
Mhm.
why do you think, was it just the backlash? Was it the fear? Is that what you're sort of that you think contribute to this whole "I won't treat a COVID patient"? Was it those things? Was there anything else that may have went into that? Because it's for me to imagine too.
Yeah, you know what I thought? John Maxwell talks to us often about only 3% of the population think. And I thought, gosh, that seems like a low number. We all think we're the 3%, right?
Right.
Oh, I know I'm the 3%. Or that you really have to be somebody that's super educated to be one of those 3%. And, I have some people that don't have a formal education that really were speaking wisdom during this process. And then I had some people that have a lot of education that just seem like, this is the guideline. I'm not going to think outside the box. I'm not going to try to seek out other research. I'm not going to see what other people are doing that are being successful. I'm just going to follow this one path of thought. And I was really shocked and surprised at how many people in my profession did that and did not, because I feel like you go into this profession because you care about people, because you want to help people. And so how can we get to the point where we just won't because of this one thing, and we're not going to think outside the box, and we're not going to do things differently? So I was really surprised. I think that it brought to my, thinking that John Maxwell is correct.
Right.
That and I also know that fear blocks that. We don't think rationally when we're caught up in fear. And so we do things, or we get frozen from doing things if we're afraid. And so, if and I will tell you, I had to remind myself, because it was fearful at first. We are on the front line. What if I get sick and I can't see patients and all these people, or I'm the leader, I'm leading this team. And so what happens, and what if, especially in the beginning when we didn't know. So I
Right.
had to remind myself many times, and I had to just ask God to calm that and spend some extra time to make sure that was calm in me. And so I had to do that for myself first. So John Maxwell says that the hardest person to lead is to lead yourself. And so I had to lead myself in calming that fear before I could lead my staff into that. And, some of them were still fearful and, just didn't want to go against the grain. We're blessed we have a whole new team in here. But it was a very difficult time when we were making that transition. And I never thought I was going to have to ask people in an interview, if you know a treatment that may work to help your patient, but the CDC is saying not to treat, will you still treat? And that's pretty provocative, really,
It can't be, sure.
to ask that. Now, I'm not saying we would go against that in everything. We have some great guidelines through that organization, and I'm thankful for it. But they don't even know. I think we'll see really, 5 years from now, 3 years from now, we'll be able to evaluate more. But when you're in the heat of it, you just got to do what you know.
That's so true. And you're speaking as a medical person, and everything you're talking about, I can just relate as an individual and just as a regular non-medical person at home, nervous at first.
Yes.
And then, like you, I decided I'm going to do my own homework.
Yes.
And then the more I researched, the more my husband and I researched and read about our age group.
Yes.
And what is the real mortality rate? What's really happening as far as deaths?
Yes.
We wanted to look beyond cases. And what's really our chance of really getting sick? And it was so low. And again, everybody, Kim and I are fine. If you disagree with anything that we've said, it's perfectly fine by us.
Yes.
She's sharing from a nurse practitioner standpoint. And I find it fascinating because that was what I was doing just as an individual. And we were still traveling. We were still going places, and we had friends and people in our circle are so lovely, even if we disagree. And I love that. Give me people that aren't like me all day long, and I'll take it. Just asking us, you guys aren't afraid at all? And my answer was always, listen, I know that I can get COVID. I accept that. But I also accept the research and the information about how likely am I to get really sick or die. And it was so low that I could not trade that for just freedom. I couldn't embrace the fear for something that's marginal. I mean, just almost not even on a graph for my age and my health. And so we were kind of like you. And so we just encouraged our friends to do their research. And we started vitamin D and we started zinc, and we traveled throughout the entire pandemic. We never stopped going out to eat. We live in Georgia, and our state was closed a minimal amount of time, just March, April-ish. And by May 1st, we were sort of, out and about restaurants, getting my nails done.
Yes.
And it just, and I really respect, and I know you do too, Kim, we totally respect where everybody is in this. And I continue to utter that. I respect where you are. I'm just someplace different.
Yes. And that's okay. And I think you just said the honor and respect of meeting people where they are. And I think that's important, and not making that a part of division for us. So
has any of this sort of been off-putting to you in a major way? I mean, sure, you went through all the emotions, I'm sure, but has any of this really been off-putting to you as a healthcare provider, or has it just really made you even more excited about the work that you do?
Oh, well, I mean, I love what we do, and I am excited about the work we do. And I'm happy that we were in a place to be able to tell people, I don't want you to be afraid about COVID, because we know how to treat it. The key is getting here early. So, if you get it, you call me right away, and we will make sure you're okay. And that I was able to tell them the truth in that. But in the meantime, I want you to take these vitamins. I want you to be diligent with it. I want you to do what you can to keep yourself healthy. And I think it was a great motivating factor for people. Look, you need to sleep, you need to not eat so much sugar, and get out and exercise. This is a great way to keep.
Sort of embrace sugar, Kim. I'm sorry, especially in the early days.
A lot of people did. I thought when all the restaurants closed down, I thought, oh, everybody's going to get healthy because they're eating at home and they're going to have all these home cooked meals. That is not what happened. You're right.
It's almost the opposite is what actually happened.
That is true.
Many of us, like myself, and I now have to reverse course. I've been so great for so many years, and all of a sudden COVID. And I wasn't fearful. I was like, oh no, we can't have the John Maxwell team event. Oh no, we can't have this. And so, just eating my feelings a little bit. I don't know if I asked you this, Kim, when we spoke before today, and you've given us a lot to think about in this, but what would you say that an empowered life looks like to you or means to you?
Mhm. One, thinking outside the box, and not listening to all of the rhetoric. I think that the news gets a lot of viewers because they can stir people up, and so that's not the voice I want to listen to. I want to listen to voices that are really in the same arena, dealing with what I'm dealing with on a daily basis. And then those are the people I listen to. So being really choosy and careful who I listen to, make sure that I'm communicating with people that are going to lift me up, so that we can connect and sharpen each other. I think that is so important to be able to do that. And the neat thing is, there were so many people that were in the same arena, that were willing to share information, connect, and help those that were willing to listen. And I think that's the key, that we're really willing to listen. And so I was willing to listen and do all I could to seek out what I could do for my patients. And it's a passion because I love my patients. And it breaks my heart when I can't help them. Now, I can't help everything, but if there's something I can do, and I will research my head off for months to be able to find what is the best possible treatment that I can do for you. So, and that comes more from a passion and a compassion for those people that I serve. But I don't know if I answered your question, but I think not looking just at one view or one narrow. I love the fact that you talked about diversity of thought. I love talking to people I don't agree with, because I think it sharpens us. For listening to just one view all the time, that's what made America great, was our different viewpoints, our different stories, our different things. I mean, that's what our diversity of thought made us think about things differently. And so, I think that's how we grew and did so well. And so that's what we need now, is to be able to think things through, disagree, because when you disagree, it's going to make me think about, well, I need to consider this something different that you're talking about. And let me hear more and try to understand you. And maybe you'll want to understand me, and maybe we can come up with something better together than the one had. So
that is so good, Kim. And I agree with all of that. And that's why I was so excited when you agreed to sit down and have this conversation with me. And we know that people are on different pages about COVID, about treatment, and that's okay with us. And that's why Kim and I thought, no problem. But we know that this community appreciates diversity. And we know this community, created by our friend and mentor, Paul Martinelli, appreciates just the ideas that two people or more could bring together. And if they're different, then that's okay. And that's why I was so excited. And I just have to thank Paul for bringing us together. Kim and I met at Paul's house. We actually saw each other at the IMC back in August of 2021. And little did we know that we were going to both be at Paul's house one of the following nights for dinner. And then we ran into each other at the airport and had a wonderful, great conversation. And I thought, boy, I like her, because she's saying some things that even challenge my thinking, or that help me think in a different way, whether I agree or not. So,
yes,
Kim, what you do in the world is a blessing. You do God's work in the world.
Yeah, you do it, Regina. Thank you. Thank you.
And healthcare providers are some of my favorite people. I worked in healthcare for many years as the administrative side of things, and I love you guys and what you do for us. And so it's been a real blessing to hear from you. And I know that, Kim, you can share some resources with us that we can post in the comments and on our Facebook page. If you just want to know where Kim got some of her information from, you agree with Kim, or you want to challenge your own thinking, we're going to share some links to some of the articles recommended by Kim. Kim, it has been an honor and a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Regina. I appreciate it.
Thanks everybody for joining us for this extra long edition of the Women of Empowered Living. And I will see all of you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.